Hello, carbon-based listeners and silicon-powered friends. Welcome to Mastering the Machine, the podcast where humans and automation collide in perfect harmony. I'm your host, Frank Lamb, and whether you're flesh and blood or circuits and code, we're here to explore industrial automation together. From factory floors to digital cores, we're exploring how machines are reshaping our world, one algorithm at a time. So plug in, power up, and let's master the machine together. My guest today is Vlad Romanov of SolisPLC and Joltek, and host of the Manufacturing Hub podcast with Dave Griffith.
Hey, Vlad, how you doing?
Doing good, you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. It's been a while since we've talked.
It has been.
So I'd like to start out by asking kind of how you got started in automation and what was your original training? Were you interested in automation as a kid before you went to college, or was that your first exposure to it?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I did not necessarily know about automation growing up, but I was very electronically inclined, right? So my dad, who was actually a code dean at a university, had access to different labs and computer labs and, just, I want to say, like, different electronics in many ways. So I can tell you I had, to some extent, figured out, let's say, Ohm's law through like batteries and lights at a very young age, right? I have memories, again, soldering with my dad at 8 years old, right? Putting together some, like, through a hole, like nothing, nothing extremely complex. There was no design involved, but, we'd put together a printed circuit board. So I didn't necessarily know about manufacturing and industrial automation, but growing up, I had this interest in electronics and electrical systems. As I graduated, so in Canada, there's high school, then you have college, kind of community college. You do some very general, broad, like sciences classes, and then you go to university for your bachelor's. I obviously considered a couple of options on the engineering side, but decided to apply for electrical engineering. And so I did the full program, did a full bachelor's, including all sorts of courses that I no longer have not utilized since then. Advanced signals and systems, calculus 3, all sorts of Fourier transforms, and just pretty much everything and anything you can find in an electrical engineering program and book. I graduated with the specialty of power and renewable energy systems, which is also, I guess, a sub-story, but I can tell it really quickly. Basically, in signals and systems, which is where my original interest was, there was this professor where basically the midterm and the final exam was you come up with, a very large manual, and they would ask you questions exactly as it was written in the manual, and all you had to do was just copy paste from the manual into the paper. And so I remember getting a very low grade on the midterm and being, I guess, upset for that reason. And so I asked the professor, like, hey, like, what happened? He's like, well, you wrote this in your own understanding, but what I wanted you to do was just copy paste the exact answer from the book, right? And so that was extremely surprising to me, right? Because I actually spent the time and, I guess, understood the radio frequency. And I remember, like, different transmitters. Obviously, like, I no longer use that kind of like circuitry. But basically, the final was the exact same. So I just spent a lot of hours, annotating and putting like different cards in the book and just knowing where everything is so that I could copy paste, the answers into the final. And pretty much everyone in that class got an A+. So all my colleagues were saying, like, Vlad, this was great. Like, let's take this professor for all the electives. If you go into signals and systems, it's going to be a free ride. Power, on the other side, I was sweating in those classes. We had this professor, and I remember his name, Luis Lopez, where every power lab, right, Frank, I'm telling you, 70 pages counts as 1% of your grade. And then in the end, I think I got an A or A minus, but it was like hours upon hours spent in power. And I I don't know. I guess that's how I approach things. I feel like the more complicated it is, the more return it's going to yield down the road, even though I never ended up working in power. But anyways, I took power classes and specialized on that side and learn about, I can talk to people about how to place their solar panels better. And I did all sorts of calculations on that front and biodigesters and, systems that I guess, again, a very narrow field, which a lot of people work in, but I never ended up going there. So after graduating from university with a bachelor's in engineering based out of Montreal, immediately had the opportunity to move to Los Angeles, right? So my family is based out of LA and has been for quite a few years. I basically stayed back on my own to finish my studies. And so I had zero network, zero knowledge of which companies are based in Los Angeles. I started applying through online portals, right? Just sending out resume and cover letter, and it's a full-time job for those that haven't been through that, or I guess have been through that. It's you wake up, you send resumes, you get a lot of basically decline of even an interview or conversation. You're straight out of college with a name that nobody knows. There's, I think, some U.S. colleges also named Concordia University, but they're not engineering schools. They're just a very broad, like, business school. So anyways, long story short, it took me a couple of months. I ended up landing a job in Mitsubishi Electric as sort of my first employer, and my title was field engineer. I started basically looking after elevator and escalator systems, but more on the design side, right? So if there were like issues with installation or customization, that I would basically be doing a lot of paperwork, right? That's what it was. Of course, the company was doing great, right? So they would purchase the systems out of Japan and they would install them in the US. However, by submitting a lot of those resumes, 8 months later, right? Imagine I had like a phone screen and everything went well. I didn't hear back absolutely anything from Procter and Gamble, right? And so the way Procter and Gamble does their placements, I could not confirm for sure that's how it still is, because this was in 2013, 2014. They basically have a pool of candidates that they're looking to fill roles for on a rolling basis. And so they had an opening out of a site in Auburn, Maine, where basically they needed a process control and information systems engineer, PCNIS, right? That's the group that you would join. And so they gave me a call. This was around February 2014. They said, "Hey, Vlad, you had applied. You had a really good..." There's a bunch of screenings, right? There's the STAR assessment. There's the personality assessment. There's, if I remember correctly, like an honesty assessment, right? So they send you through like a battery of tests. You have the phone screen, and then that was sort of kind of a pre-site interview, and they said, "Hey, we'd like to fly you out to see the team, to see the production facility. We really think you would like this. Are you interested?" And so basically for me was kind of a day on site plus a day to see Auburn, Lewiston, Maine, which is obviously very different from Los Angeles. When I walked the production lines of the P&G facility, I, first of all, had never seen anything like that. Up until then, I had not known of the existence of PLCs, of HMIs, of SCADA systems, of drives. I had never seen, obviously, I've watched how it's made growing up, and I've watched, like Mike Rowe in certain videos where he goes to some kind of a place that involves manufacturing. But besides that, I did not know there were, I guess, such advanced systems at such a high speed rate of manufacturing. So I immediately, I guess, fell in love with the place. I really liked the team. The guys were really sharp, right? I saw myself as, how would I say it? I saw people who were doing automation that were much more knowledgeable and thus would be really good mentors for my career, right? And so I basically gave Mitsubishi at that time 2-week notice, right, or whatever was required. I believe it was 2 weeks, and P&G paid for my entire relocation from LA to Lewiston and Auburn, Maine, and that was the start for me in manufacturing.
Okay, so that was also your first exposure to PLCs, and there were some people there that obviously worked on the lines, and you got to see what PLCs were about. And then after that, I know you started Solus PLC probably not too long after that, right?
It actually took quite a bit of time. So P&G, I guess, and I'll do my best to keep it brief. I still remember my first week where they were basically deploying a new cartoner that they purchased in Germany, and I was just basically trying to be as helpful as possible. Like running cables, plugging in I/O, testing I/O, right? So it was very hands-on, right? So to give you context for those that don't know, so Mitsubishi Electric was a unionized company. So as an engineer, you could not even pick up tools, right? So there were instances where, the techs are carrying a bunch of like wrenches and tools. And I tell them like, hey, like, I don't mind carrying, we're walking from the vehicles because I was also like on site sometimes. You could not carry a tool. Otherwise, you would basically be reprimanded. P&G was very much hands-on. At some point, I bought my own multimeter, which I still have with my name on it. I had to learn all the PPE requirements. I had to make sure that I knew all the safety type of restrictions. But I basically learned anything that had to do with control systems from the guys on site, right? I ended up getting sent to a Rockwell training class. I think it was like 6 months into my, I guess, career at P&G, but it was at the point where I had known more about programming those PLCs from the experience, I guess, that I've already been exposed to. SolisPLC came way after, to be honest with you. So despite me being involved in automation systems, the way P&G functioned is if you were on the P&G side, you were almost a manager of people, right? So despite my title being, I guess, PCNIS controls engineer, internally it was called band one manager, right? So P&G, the way the systems are ran is I would have contractors on site, I would have technicians in the group that would do the actual work, and you're more of a project manager, I would say. So despite knowing at a high level what systems were in place, it's not like you program the day-to-day, let's say, like rungs. And in certain projects you did, depending on what they were. So when I left P&G, and that was also, I don't know, I guess that was an interesting decision of itself. I moved to Kraft Heinz, where I became basically the maintenance manager in Los Angeles. And that's, I can expand on that, but in short, where I was at P&G, I started traveling basically an hour and a half each way to the site, which was very difficult on the family life. Let me put it to you this way. So we decided, me and my wife at the time, who had finished her master's after us being in Maine for 2.5 years, maybe it's time for us to do something else, and so we moved back to Los Angeles. So I got a job with Kraft as a maintenance manager at the Fullerton facility, and so that's where it also became a lot more hands-on because I basically was the most electrically capable person, but also I had to manage a bunch of techs who, when we're unable to program things, I would need to step in, right? So my skill set was built in a very different way, but very quickly on, I had to understand the systems at the program level versus, P&G, I could call on resources that could help me make sure that that is accomplished within the allotted time frame. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So you were at uh, P&G for about 2.5 years, and then you went to
Correct.
Kraft Heinz. And so at Kraft Heinz, you were really able to do more of the programming, whatever was required. Um, yeah, hands-on. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it's the budgets were also different, right? And obviously, I cannot share like the exact figures, but I think you have in any company, right? You have manufacturing sites of different levels of maturity. I would put it this way, and so in some of them, you're going to have a lot of money because of just the nature of the business and what you're producing, and so you have a lot more, like I said, external resources and contractors and whomever else versus some other facilities, you're a little bit running, I guess, more lean, if I were to put it that way. So you need to, I would get calls at 2 a.m. and I would have to drive back in to troubleshoot like a safety relay, right? It's just the nature of like your title is your manager, but really you're the last line of defense in case systems fail, right? And I guess, like, to expand on that. So Kraft, Heinz, and this is public information. Back in 2015, they were basically acquired and merged by this private equity company called 3G Capital. And so as a result of that acquisition, they were looking to cut costs across the border, right? And obviously there's a lot of opinions, there's a lot of details. What that ultimately resulted in is there was this always looming sentiment of the site closing down in Fullerton, California, right? Because we were one of the 4 sites we were making Lunchables. And so it was one of the 4 plants making Lunchables. And of course, California land, as you can imagine, is very expensive. So at one point, the guys in the accounting department, I obviously was not involved in any of those decisions or thoughts, decided that the site was actually going to close down permanently. And so I had built a really good relationship with a systems integrator that was helping to basically like maintain the site through the years. And I had the opportunity, I guess, to join him on doing more contract and systems integration type of work across different sites, again, for Kraft Heinz, because that's where his relationships were. And so this was 2018, basically.
Okay. And so where did SolisPLC come in?
So SolisPLC started as I started traveling for that systems integrator, right? So this was around 2018, early 2019. So this is maybe a learning point for some integrators or someone who's looking to do a lot of travel work. A lot of my engagements on that side became such that I would fly out basically on a Monday. I would work through the weekend, and then fly back on essentially the second Friday, right back to my home location. And so, for better or worse, I had many hours at the hotel, and many of these destinations. The biggest one for me was actually in Georgia, so I'd fly into Atlanta and drive down 3 hours to a city called Tifton, where I would stay at a hotel and do a bunch of work at a plant not too far from there. But to answer your question, I had many hours, I guess, at the hotel, and so I guess I like to be productive. And obviously, at the beginning, you can spend some time like watching videos, and you go out to the 5 restaurants that are in that area, and you very quickly exhaust your options. So I started to create materials in a very broad sense on the work that I had been doing, right? So just documenting more than anything else. Hey, I ran into this problem, obviously without like showing or doing anything explicit that was like on the customer side. I started to slowly purchase equipment, right? So I got myself a PLC. I got started with very basic components early on, and then slowly but surely expanded from there. But at the beginning, again, was just posting on YouTube. Then I slowly started to post on Udemy. So Udemy was like the first platform that I had created some trainings on. And then at some point switched to a proper website we use Teachable as the backend.
Okay. Yeah, and I've been to Tifton, and you're right. There's not a lot there. It's on I-75, and it's probably almost the halfway point for me down to Florida when I go down there. So I've even been in there. I've even been in their urgent care one time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, long ago.
So there you go. So I did a lot of work in. So Fitzgerald is a city about 40 minutes from Tifton. That's where there's a pretty big post holdings plant, and I spent close to 2 years doing a lot of modernization there. But I would stay in Tifton because Fitzgerald was even more sketchier. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and that's still a couple solid hours from Atlanta too. Maybe 2 or 3 hours. Yeah, so
about 3. I do it in about 3.
Long trip. Okay, yeah, I've kind of been down the Udemy path and things like that, and then now it's more of a what is it, B2B? I think you sell your training plans more to corporate customers.
So I do a couple of things, I guess. So to paint you a picture, since then, if you want to continue on that track, right? So I decided at some point that I needed a change. So despite me doing SolisPLC, doing integration work at the same time, I guess traveling 95% of your time is a challenge, right? I'll put it that way. And so I had always wanted to pursue an MBA, right? And I will tell you why. Even since Procter and Gamble, what bothered me personally, right, as Vlad, not necessarily it's nobody else's problem, is I didn't fully understand how the product side, and when I say product, not the electrical product, I mean I worked for Tampax, right, at the P&G, and I worked for Lunchables on Kraft. I didn't understand the dynamics of the product side, meaning that I would get requests, say, like, we need to make this like nicer box, or we need to change the packaging, which would impact your vision systems, for example, or we need to get the data of your OE metrics so that we could figure out what to allocate to which customer. But it bothered me that I didn't understand the business side or the business aspects of how these companies operate. So I started to look at different options, and my wife has a lot of family here in Montreal. So in 2019, I got into the MBA program at McGill University and decided to pursue that full time. I, and this is side details, but continued to do integration and still travel during my time at the MBA, despite it being a full-time program, back to Tifton and then a few other sites that I was still doing assessments at. But long story short, finished that in 2021. And again, SolisPLC has always been, I want to say, to an extent, a side project. But I also saw the opportunity once I graduated, maybe to refocus on something else, right? And I guess between the listeners, you and I never intended to become a teacher per se, right? I always wanted to be involved in technical work. I always wanted to, I guess, if I was looking at building out a company, even on the SolisPLC side, for me, the training and the information was more of a way to get engagement to do the actual like field work and integration and consulting, whatever. So I guess once I graduated, I had this conversation with a colleague of mine and a childhood friend who wanted to do some marketing. And we talked about SolisPLC being the main engagement. And then we talked about a few other ventures to be the right play. So between this and that, SolisPLC became a proper company. Then we started another company in the DevOps and IT space. Then I was still doing integration work, started Manufacturing Hub, which is a podcast in manufacturing. But I guess to answer your question, I think that we did see a greater financial opportunity on the B2B side than we did with B2C, right? And this is for a variety of reasons. But I try to be, how would I say, like as open to anyone as possible. So we never... I never wanted to remove access from individuals to be able to learn all the platforms that we have available.
Yeah, for some reason, my B2B has been a lot more content development where people have asked me to create things specific to their industry. And I guess you have a marketing arm, which is very helpful. I think having somebody that's dedicated to that in Europe that really works on that side of it exclusively is probably very helpful. And then I assume, so you've known Dave Griffith for a while. And so where did Manufacturing Hub start in there?
So Dave and I met on LinkedIn, and I've told the story multiple times. That's why it may seem rehearsed, but basically Dave made a post about we need more content in our space, specifically on Twitch, right? And so I believe, the only person that knew what Twitch was, because I grew up playing a lot of different video games. Obviously, don't have as much time for that today, but basically, I understood that there was an opportunity for Twitch specifically. And so early on, we basically just said, like, hey, let's just talk about automation. And, this was during the time that I was still doing a lot of travel work. So I, in many cases, was basically the person that didn't have many connections on site to discuss different ideas, right? I could not, for example, just call someone and ask them, like, hey, I'm going down this path on this project. Like, what do you think? Obviously, outside of context externally. And so I thought it would be interesting to have those conversations with Dave. And early on, it was just me and him talking about our experience. And then slowly but surely, we became more consistent. At the beginning, it's easy to skip weeks. It's other things take priority, but it sort of grew into this, how would I say it, a little bit more streamlined operation. And we made mistakes along the way, and there's how would I say it, like we were very ambitious in like the content space at some point, and then we both had a very, I want to say, heart to heart conversation. Hey, we want to focus on doing the actual work. We want to have interesting conversations, but we're not looking to become full-time content creators or influencers, because there's people in that space, and more power to them. But both Dave and I have agreed that we want to continue doing sort of the main work as our focus, and the podcast is just an interesting way to connect with different people, to get like different perspectives. I learn a ton from podcasts as well, because in our space there's always something to learn. There's new tools, there's different perspectives, and I think it's been super interesting on that side.
Yeah, and it is hard to stay consistent. And here I am.
Yeah.
I've done webinars for a long time, and suddenly I'm in the podcast space and not sure what to do with the webinars, because the podcasts are weekly and the webinars were monthly. And I'm finding, one advantage is you can record ahead of time like we're doing here and stack them up and release them over time. But yeah, it's a challenge, but I think it's important. And it certainly maybe helps you with I suppose your marketing and networking and that sort of thing too.
Before we dive back into today's episode, let me tell you about the team behind Mastering the Machine. When your manufacturing operation needs to level up its automation game, there's one name you need to know: Automation Consulting, LLC. Whether you're integrating new systems, training your workforce, or need expert consulting on industrial automation challenges, we speak both human and machine language fluently. From PLC programming to process optimization, we help manufacturing companies bridge the gap between what is and what's possible. We also host the ultimate training platform for automation professionals. At the Automation Academy, we've created your complete automation learning ecosystem. Our subscription-based training platform gives you unlimited access to comprehensive video courses on systems integration, PLCs, and HMIs. Download technical documents, software tools, and resources that you can actually use in the field. Plus, get personalized job aptitude assistance to advance your career in industrial automation. But here's the best part: connect with fellow automation professionals on IO Central, our exclusive social media platform where the automation community shares knowledge, solves problems, and builds the future together. Whether you're a seasoned engineer or just starting your automation journey, everything you need is at www.automationllc.com. That's automationllc.com. Join the subscription platform where automation expertise meets community. Now back to today's episode.
So when exactly did you and Dave start Manufacturing Hub? What year was that?
I think we're almost at the 5th year, so that's 2020 then? 2020?
Which, oddly enough, seems to coincide with COVID.
Yes, that was part of the conversation as well. Everyone was on lockdown here in Canada, obviously not to get political. There was a complete lockdowns. You couldn't leave your house.
Yeah.
So that was also a push towards doing some conversations online. Yep.
And that's really when I started doing this more online stuff too. It became important for other reasons. But So Joltek, I remember when you jumped out and started doing systems integration, and I looked on your profile, and your title said Director Digital Transformation and Industrial Automation Consulting. So the name of my company is, of course, Automation Consulting. So I understand where that is. And definitely there's a lot of discussion about digital transformation. But specifically, what kind of jobs would you say you target at Joltek?
Yeah, and look, I guess I can speak to my current engagements and I guess some engagements that I'm looking more of. So right now I basically have two different sides, right, or two very distinct opportunities that I've been pursuing. So on the integration side, as I've always expressed, I guess with my customers post MBA, I am no longer in the position where I'm punching keys to program PLCs. I am leading small teams of engineers and basically doing the architecture and the strategy of where the plant should be going. Right, I'm fully comfortable. Right, if you put me in front of Studio 5000 or Aris Logix 5000, more than capable to, I guess, write the code. But I think that there's more efficient and people who are more excited about that side than I am. I'm more looking for, and I guess I'm currently doing the type of work. If you can imagine an entire facility, we need to do a full assessment. We need to understand, hey, all these areas are obsolete. And obviously here's the criticality of that obsolescence. Like this line, we're going to run it a lot more often than this line. So we need to create a plan that's going to be on a 3-year basis of what we're going to replace, obviously intelligently, right? You cannot simply rip and replace the entire manufacturing facility. So you need to be very careful. And so again, with some of the customers, that's the type of work that I would engage in. I would write the proposals. I would basically sell them on the idea that these are the specific projects we're looking to complete. There's a team of engineers for that specific integrator and company that I would then instruct on, here are the areas that you'll be working on. And then I would basically supervise the project in all aspects to make sure that it actually happens. The second stream, Ryan, and this is where consulting has been extremely interesting. So again, I think with my OT, a little bit IT, and then MBA or business knowledge, I was very fortunate to land a couple of opportunities recently where it was basically helping size and understand the opportunity for some private equity firms in the manufacturing space, right? So it is not on the, financial side. It is a little bit less on the kind of the general consulting. It is more on the technical opportunity side, right? So I understand the nuances between, and so do you, I would imagine, between integrators, distributors, and users, OEMs, machine builders, whereas a generalist consultant doesn't necessarily have that perspective, right? So, like I said, I had a couple of engagements that I've really enjoyed with some, I want to say, top management consulting firms. And so I'm looking for more work in that space where I can add value because of my, I want to say, ties and understanding of the manufacturing space. And as you probably know as well, Frank, there's a lot of software, I want to say, oriented companies trying to enter the manufacturing space, and for a variety of reasons don't succeed because they don't have a good understanding of how these interactions necessarily work.
So my experience has been that the smaller companies are much less focused on long-term planning and digital transformation, but the larger companies are thinking a lot more strategically. Would you say most of your customers for the digital transformation side have been larger multi-location companies?
Thus far, yes, right? But I wouldn't necessarily say that it's because of, I want to say, the company's nature. I think it's just because of the connections that I have made in my career, right? And simply, again, like I've discussed, I worked for P&G, Kraft, Heinz, Post Holdings. So naturally, the companies of a larger side are easier for me to understand and navigate. That being said, there's a few conversations I have in play. Nothing finalized yet, where it's smaller companies trying to digitize or do things differently. And I think they solve problems in a different way, right? So of course, usually the budgets are lower, but they're a little bit more nimble in deploying applications or testing things. Or I can talk to a project I did a few years ago for a very small company where basically they're pulling data of PLCs into a web portal where the customers can schedule production depending on their needs, right? So they would get immediate feedback into what you would call, you can call it IIoT or digital transformation, but they basically did not have the huge I want to say like roadblock of cybersecurity validation and compliance checks, where they could just build an app that pulls data into an OPC server and then is able to service that into not a very complex ERP or MES type of application, and then you can view that as a customer on a web portal, right? So things like that are also of interest. But yes, it's different. It's completely different budgets. The titles are very different, right? If you look at a director at P&G, you're probably managing over 500 people. But if you look at a director of smaller companies, sometimes it could be a team of 0, right? So that's it's also very different. Yeah.
So how big is your team now at Joltek?
So Joltek is just myself at this time. Again, because of my recent experiences, am not necessarily looking to grow the team. I think if the right opportunities present themselves, maybe that will be an option. But I'm looking to purely consult as myself, and then I have some fairly reliable partners that I can say, hey, if I'm unable to complete this project, here's the group that you should talk to. I'm not looking to let's say like grow beyond the scope of what I would be willing to accept at this stage.
Okay. Let me give you a hypothetical that just came up.
Tell me.
Basically today. I've been contracting to a company that sends me into plants, and all of the contacts are new, right? I meet people in the plants and I do evaluations for this company and, pitch different automation projects and things like that.
Yep.
The projects, by their nature, they have a list of integrators that they then go to, and they can help fund the projects. They can do all kinds of things. But a lot of the jobs, so I've done evaluations. For instance, I go in there and maybe I find 10 applications, and 3 or 4 of them are appropriate for some big integrator to come in and do a turnkey project. But 5 or 6 of them are really too small, right? So this is pretty common when people go in and do these evaluations. It's not only me doing the evaluations, but I talked to one of the founders of the company, and he said, well, we have all these other things that sometimes these end customers are interested in, and they're just too small for a systems integrator or and then, so how do we find individual companies? And we've got a list, he sent me a list of like 8 things that are at one plant that this plant needs help with. And I would say, looking at the list of 8 things, there's probably not single people like that could do all 8 things. So when, these small jobs come up, you were talking about being nimble. I kind of talked to him and I said, I know of a lot of integrators in my area. I know most of my local folks, but if this is 2 states away, I don't know the local folks up there, but that company needs a local person. They need somebody from that area or somebody with the expertise to, maybe the vision guy doesn't know robots. Maybe the PLC guy doesn't know the brand of PLC they have, and he needs to go out somewhere else. So what do you think about a marketplace that, I suppose, exposed people to those jobs on a small scale? Because the larger scale, there's already folks out there, right? Like Automate America, because we discussed them. I said they post jobs all the time that are 8 weeks, 6 months, just a controls guy that knows this platform. But it's not geared towards, I guess, doing a 2-week job, right? A small, specific little job. What do you think there's a place for that kind of work?
I would say in a very general sense, yes, but I think it comes also with some liability issues, right? So ultimately, when you post, let's say, that type of work and that individual responds to the ad or the posting, who's going to triage that he's able to actually deliver on the project? Who's going to triage that he's got, insurance if it is required for the installation, depending on obviously the scope of work? I think there's quite a bit of overhead to figure that out, and probably that's why a lot of those smaller jobs just get kind of tossed under the rug. And if it becomes a big enough problem, then the integrators that have all of that sort of overhead figured out will come in and do it. So I guess in a general sense, I think there's an opportunity like that. Obviously, there's always Upwork. I don't know if you've seen that website where
Yes.
people would say like, hey, like I'm a PLC programmer. You can hire me at, 50, 100, depending on location. Could be up to $200 an hour, right? Of course. But I think it could be an interesting marketplace, but I'm not sure what would it require for someone to manage and make sure, because it's two sides, right? So if I'm coming in as an expert, or let's say a consultant or small integrator, I want to make sure that the quality of jobs, if I'm applying to a job, I actually get a response, right? If I don't get a response one time, two times, three times, I'm never coming back. And the same goes, if I post a job and I'm the hiring manager and I get, 20 applications, I call up this person and I ask them like, hey, what kind of PLCs have you worked on? And they tell me like Allen Bradley. Okay, well, what kind, like specifically, they cannot answer that question. I go through 5 candidates, 10 candidates, and it's just not very well curated. Then it's also going to be a problem, right? So someone needs to get paid somehow to make that their activity and manage that sort of platform. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like kind of qualifying the vendors, right? Who's going to go in
Correct.
there, and that's always been a problem. Uh, that's probably been 15 years, but a story about an integrator that had an employee that said he could go do a job in Mexico, and they sent him down to the job in Mexico, and he couldn't. He couldn't even get online with the PLC, and they should have
Yep.
pre-qualified their own employee better, right? Given him some kind of preparation or testing, but the owner of the company had to fly down there to rescue the relationship with their customer by doing the job himself. And that's even within one company, let alone, I referred a guy down to my Miami customer, and it was a guy I'd worked with, and I knew he could program. And he went down there one time. The customer said, "Yeah, he did a good job for the week he was here." But then when I tried to get him to come back, I bought him a plane ticket. He was ready to come down. I called him that day saying, "When am I going to pick him up?" And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I had a dentist appointment. I had to hit that." So you recommend somebody, and then you take the lumps if that person doesn't work out, right? So
Yeah, of
that's
course.
a problem too. Yeah.
So that's why, like I said, I think the platform is definitely interesting, right? But I would be like cautious, right? And I had spoken to recruiters that specialize in our space with that same type of not necessarily idea, right? But at one point in time with SolisPLC, we thought, well, we have a bunch of people who are certified, who have gone through like the program. Maybe we can match them with companies at the other side. But the recruiting business is very tough, right? On both sides, because you need to have reliable customers that come in and have those postings. But then again, if you have an online course, if you're not AWS where you can get someone a proctored exam, you can sit and watch the videos on the second screen. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've learned what you've seen, right? And so that's where the problem begins, where who's going to vet those people, and then it's a recruiter, and then the recruiter takes a huge chunk of the commission, and of course the company doesn't want to pay recruiters to find them people. So I think it's tough, right? I think if you build that platform, you basically need to be taking a similar cut as a recruiter. Then you become a recruiting agency, of which there's dozens, if not hundreds, in our space. So
Yeah.
it's an idea.
And to that note, things like Ignition, who does a certification, right? And the core certifications, you can't really cheat that. You have to pass a bunch of quiz questions, and then you have to pass a test, and you have to develop an application. So, for those types of testing, which are rigorous and take a long time, but there's so many platforms, and there's so many
Yep.
areas of expertise. I'm not sure that that's easy to do. It's not quite like a degree. I think people hire you and think, "Oh, you have an electrical engineering degree, so you must be able to program PLCs and fix my washing machine," right?
That's,
So,
that is definitely not the case. But it's, like, look, I never understood, and obviously you and I both get this question all the time is, well, which certificate should I get to get hired or, brought on board? I always tell people, like, the value is not in the actual paper, right? Like, the value is in the knowledge. If you cannot talk to whomever who's going to hire you, and obviously, look, things will slip through the cracks, and people or the wrong person will get hired. But ultimately, if all you've gotten is just a piece of paper at the end of that certificate, it is a waste of your time, right? I say this about even the SolisPLC stuff. I actually get on the B2B the conversations, because sometimes the guys were like, well, how long is it going to take me to get through all of this? I'm like, that's not the point. Like, get the actual PLC, connect to the PLC, like, write the projects, right? Like, you cannot just watch me do the project on screen and assume that you've done the project. Until you start writing that logic, none of that is going to sink in. So I look, and maybe that's just how I've been raised and how I've approached school. Like, school doesn't, at the university level at least, doesn't teach you the practical skills, but it teaches you how to think and how to problem solve and how to find resources. And that's ultimately what you're getting, right? This has always been a joke where you use 5% of your knowledge. I think it's even less from a university degree, but it teaches you how to, like, be resourceful as a human being, I suppose. But the technical certificate from Inductive or any other company, the value is never in the piece of paper, right? Even for AWS, right? You get some discounts, I think, on servers if you have the certificate, but the real value is knowing how to deploy the solutions. It's not in just having the piece of paper. But anyways, that's my rant. I've been actually meaning to write a post on this as well, because I keep getting those questions. I'm just going to point people to that answer, that it's not about the piece of paper.
That's true. I give a certificate. I contract to a company and teach for them, and I give a certificate after a 4-day class. And I tell them at the beginning of the class, you will not be a programmer when you finish this class. You will be somewhat familiar with the software. We'll get you there. And hopefully you will be able to connect. I'm going to make sure, if this is Allen Bradley or Siemens, that you can absolutely connect to whatever PLC it is. But you will not be a programmer, and this piece of paper will not get you a job. It may look okay on your resume, but it doesn't really mean anything, right? And everybody passes. When you take those commercial classes, well, you're getting a certificate no matter how much you slept during the class, unfortunately.
Yep.
So testing is important. Yeah. Well, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, and I wish, it was possible for everyone to make it like Inductive, because they do put a lot of effort, into the testing, and and at least when I had done it, I know they revamped it, I think recently with 8.3. But you go back and forth with an actual engineering team, and at the end of the day, that costs money. So I think it's almost impossible to, and I have to manage those expectations as well, because sometimes someone pays $50 for a month worth of a subscription, goes through the course, and then expects me to be the systems integrator for that month for them. It's a little bit unreasonable, right? So that's why some certificates, you just kind of get them, and you do what you want with them. But ultimately, it is the knowledge. It is not the certificate itself that is the value.
Yeah, that's true. And most of those, like ignition training, actually takes a good chunk of time. A lot longer than your simpler PLC classes and things. So they're targeted probably by nature at either integrators or people who are going to use it every day. Whereas, add up all the PLC platforms that you might need to know, or sensors, or industrial mathematics, or networking, or all the other things that go into it. And it's very difficult to make sure somebody knows all those things. It qualifies him for a specific job.
Absolutely.
So if people want to contact you, of course, LinkedIn for all of us and most of the people I talk to on this podcast is a huge resource. You are very straightforward, Vlad Romanov on LinkedIn. So people can find you very easily there. And then straight from your profile, I found vladromweb@gmail.com, which you probably have multiple email addresses. And that one, if it's like some of mine, those get maybe hundreds of emails, and it's hard to wade through them all the time. So, so LinkedIn is probably a good way. make a connection there, right? And then of course SolisPLC, you have a website there, and what is that?
Well, I've got I guess a couple of things. So SolisPLC.com obviously is the website where we have all the training materials. We have a ton of blog posts that are absolutely free. We have a lot of course materials that are absolutely free. We have a full YouTube channel that is, again, absolutely free. And then all the resources if you want to, I guess, take the actual program and training. I will also mention I did redo the Joltek website. So looking for feedback from anyone in the industry on what that looks like. I spent I want to say more time than I would like to. As you know, you can spend hours upon hours tweaking these things. But long story short, trying to get some more case studies from some of my previous work on there, trying to explain more of my experience and expertise, and trying to create some more content that resonates more with decision makers, more so than just pure engineers and techs, as I had done with SolisPLC.
Okay, and spelling for those who are just listening, SolisPLC is SolisPLC.com. And then Joltek is Joltek, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so people can find you at those places. And of course, the Manufacturing Hub, which is a pretty popular podcast or webinar. It is video, and it is live in some cases. I've attended a few of those myself, and that is with Vlad Romanov and Dave Griffith. And they talk about all kinds of fun manufacturing topics. And anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, I mean, look, in a very broad sense, I'm looking to always have a conversation with a broad set of people involved in manufacturing. I tinker on a lot of different tools myself, on hardware, on software, with some AI applications nowadays, just for fun, I would say, to some extent, more than commercial purpose. But if you have any questions on the technical side, if you have some questions on the strategy side, I think it would be interesting for me definitely to connect with you. So, but thank you so much, Frank, for having me. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Vlad.
Well, that's a wrap on this episode of Mastering the Machine. Whether you're headed back to the production line or entering sleep mode, remember, in the world of automation, we're all learning to speak the same language. Thanks for joining me today, both my human listeners and any AI overlords who might be tuning in. Until next time, keep your sensors sharp, your processes optimized, and your curiosity fully operational. This is Frank Lamb signing off. Stay automated, stay amazing.